6 core skills for better core strength and stability. That's what we're going to cover in this tutorial. This is for the beginners. It can also be for the intermediates and advanced if you've never heard of this before, but it's mainly for the beginners because what we do throughout all of my programs and workouts is take you through the information, layer it so you can learn it, and then you can move from that beginners to advanced in at least 12 weeks. Core skill number 1 is the neutral spine. Now this is, or can be, a little bit controversial depending on who you are. I don't think it's that controversial. I think it's quite simple. The neutral posture is the most advantageous position of the spine. It's where the passive structures of the spine are at their equilibrium, let's say. And if you want a technical definition for it, that's what we would describe it as: elastic equilibrium. It's also the most effective position for the spine with regards to injury prevention. So certainly from a beginner's perspective, we would focus on maintaining that neutral spine. And the neutral spine is essentially just managing and maintaining that slight inward curve. Yes, there's going to be little bits of movement, and there are tolerances within the neutral spine. It's not necessarily a completely static position, but there is movement to it. How we find it is very simple. We can come down on all fours. We can simply use one hand. We can round our lumbar spine, so that would be a rounded lumbar spine, which is not neutral. That would be extended lumbar spine. Again, that's not neutral. So we would look for in the middle, and then we would hold that position. So what we're trying to do is build our torso into a strong and effective piece of equipment. So what we're going to do now is move on to number 2, which is the brace. And the brace is what holds all of this in position. So we've just found that neutral posture. So again, if I come down into this position and I find that neutral posture, what I now need to do is lock it in position. So I now need to brace. So bracing is essentially acting like guy wires on a tent. And what you're doing is you're putting the tent up, which is the spine, and then you're taking all the muscles and you're creating these guy wires to hold it nice and rigid, so when wind blows, it doesn't move with the wind. It stays strong. And that's exactly what we want our bracing to do for our spine. So what we can do is just take some fingers or take some thumbs, and we can just press it into our abdominals, just above the pelvis. And then what we basically then do is use our muscles, we tension them, and push the thumb back out. That's creating tension throughout the torso, or certainly the rectus abdominis and the obliques, and that is what's going to hold the pelvis and the spine together. So when we go into movement, when we go into sport, we're not going to be, or our spine isn't going to be flopping around and flailing around. It's going to be held properly so it stays strong and stable. Number 3 is the hip hinge. So this is probably the most fundamental movement when it comes to exercise. What it requires us to do are the previous 2 movements. And what we're essentially doing is going from this upright position and going down into this position. So what we're doing is maintaining the neutral spine, and then we're bracing and holding it, and then we're getting the movement from the hip. So it's the hip moving backwards and it's the hip moving forwards. And that again is what's going to help us lift more effectively and essentially move more effectively. We'll carry more effectively, we'll press, we'll pull. Everything will happen more effectively when we maintain neutral spine, brace, and then going into a hip hinge. What we're then able to do is then understand what position our body is, or what position our body is in more effectively, which brings me on to point number 4, which is joint awareness. It's something that we've talked about already, but essentially it is what it says on the tin. Joint awareness, being aware of what your joints are doing. Now, I've already described the neutral spine, the bracing of the abdominals and the hip hinge. So let's just bring all that together. So what we want to do is we want to put this is going to be our feedback. So we're going to put this on our back. We're going to touch point here, touch point here, touch point here. So what I want to do is I need to be aware of what my joints are doing. So I need to be aware of what my spine's doing. I need to be aware of what my hips are doing. So I need to be aware that I've got all these 3 contact points. Because if I do this, what I've done is I've rounded my spine. I'm now aware of that. So I understand that's not right. So I now need to be aware of, okay, neutral spine. I can feel the gap in here with my hand. So I need to maintain that gap. So as I come forward, as I go into that hip hinge, what I'm doing is coming down into position. I've still got a bit of a gap there. I've got the contact point here and I've got the contact point there. My hips have gone back and now I need to come forward. So all the way through, I'm going through and doing sort of an inventory on what my body's doing. So I've done that with the first 3. So that essentially is one joint moving, my hip joint moving. I'm maintaining the position of the spine and I'm keeping the abdominals braced. So I'm aware of one joint moving and one joint being stationary and just keeping my correct posture. So what I'm now going to do is I'm now going to add on more joints. So there's more variables for me to think about. So I'm going to now think about my spine, my hip, and my shoulder, and to some degree my knee and my elbow as well. So again, this comes down to starting simple, starting with one joint. Get competent there, add another joint, add another joint. Instead of trying to move all your joints and do the most fancy complex exercises, but not doing it very well. For the very simple reason, your brain can't function and cope with it. So what we would do is the next one, we would come down into this all fours position. Again, we get that neutral spine, so I've got it. Lock it in place with the brace. Then I'm going to go here. Now I know, because I've done it many times before, my head's in line. I've got my neutral spine. When I've moved my leg, my spine hasn't moved. So I know my hip's moving. I know there's probably a straight line from my shoulder all the way down to my ankle and foot. What I've also got is my thumb pointing upwards, my elbows down, so my shoulder's in a good position, and what I'm not doing is rolling my shoulders or extending my back. So I can do that all through feel. I don't need to look at it. I know what it feels like. So that's what joint awareness is. It's you being able to just feel your way through good movement, rather than thinking, am I in a good position? I need to check in the mirror, or I need someone to look at me. That's what joint awareness is all about. It's building that proprioception and that competency of, let's just say muscle memory, if you want to call it that, that we know the position to go into, we know it's a good position, and we just go there naturally. Number 5 is joint mobility and stability, which basically comes off the back of joint awareness. So what we start to do as we move, we start to understand where our mobility is and where our stability is, and where we may need to improve stability or where we may need to improve mobility. So for example, if I go back down into the, well in fact, let me do a hip hinge first. So we start here. So what I start to do is I start to come through here, and then, I can start to feel not only my hamstrings pulling, but I've got a little bit coming through here, which would tell me that my hip flexors need a little bit of work. I've got a little bit coming up into the mid part of the back now as I go down a bit further, as I'm trying to keep myself up. So again, I can mobilize my hips that much more effectively, so I can get that much further down. So it's not just about the hamstrings. There will be aspects of glute medius, glute minimus. There'll be aspects of the hip flexors coming through, because I can feel that either side of the spine, so on and so forth. So I'm starting to find all that out just by doing that movement. If we take it a step further, we bring the shoulders in. What we start to do is, as we get to here, it might only be that I can get to here with my shoulder. What I really need to do is get to here. But as I get to up here, I start to rotate. So I need to then start building mobility through the shoulder to get me in a much better overhead position, as it were. When we talk about overhead, another thing that we could add, if we come into this position, we press up over the head. What we might find is we get to there, and then to go full lock, we arch at the back. We come down, we go into the normal position. So again, what we're doing, if we were to keep the body, it might be that we push there. So I do that to get the arms vertical. So what we need to do is get more range of movement at the shoulders so we can get them up and over the head. But again, we need to be aware of things like that before we go into exercise, so we know our joint awareness, so we know where our mobility and stability is, so we can then go about correcting what we need to correct or maintain what we need to maintain. The final thing, number 6, is core endurance. So we've talked a lot about just getting into a good position and being aware of it. Understanding where we might need to create greater range of movement, where we may need to create greater stability. What we then need to start doing is that over a period of time. So very simply, it just means, again, if we're, as I mentioned at the start, if we're at the beginner's level, it's just about building core endurance. So we just come down into a planking type exercise, isometric, we're not looking to move, we just want to hold all of those core skills that we've talked about. Obviously there's no movement in it, but we've got the brace, we've got the neutral spine, there is some respects of a hip hinge when we come in and out of the position, but other than that, not really. But what we're doing is we are creating the ability to hold those positions. Once we can create the ability to hold those positions, what we're then doing is we're then giving ourselves a chance, because we're not fatiguing as much, we're giving ourselves a chance to be able to hold that for a longer and greater period of time. So our movement quality gets extended out into greater intensities. So we're not only developing the body, but we're developing the brain in a way that we can focus on more movement, more muscles, more joints, better. So as we fatigue, which is when we're going to forget about all that because we just want to complete what we're completing, but when we fatigue, we can remember all that, we can focus on all of that, and we can complete hard exercises, complex exercises with proper techniques because we've built that from the ground up. Rather than, as I've mentioned many times before, throwing someone in the deep end and going basically just try and survive that exercise. Get the weight above your head and just try and survive. What we're doing is we're understanding where we need to create mobility, where we may need to create some extra stability so we can perform the movements correctly. Once we can perform them correctly, we can then build endurance to offset fatigue. Then we can start loading greater so it builds core stability that much more effectively. Those are the 6 core skills for greater core strength and stability. If you want to find out more about them, if you want to start taking part in my How to Build Core Strength and Stability workouts, just click the link below, go straight through, get registered, and you can get started right away. So many thanks for watching. My name's Chris from Chris Pole Training. I look forward to seeing you in the workouts.